The university town had a quality in the early morning that Lyrian had never successfully entered into the assessment framework, because the framework had not been designed for qualities. It had been designed for data, population density, resource consumption patterns, social cohesion indices, the measurable evidence of a civilization's trajectory. She had been filling it with data for 14 months and had found, somewhere around month 11, that the data was accurate and the picture it produced was incomplete in ways she could not attribute to methodology. She was sitting at the window of her faculty apartment at 6 in the morning, watching the town decide what it was today, when her communications unit produced the soft pulse that meant the council's scheduled transmission had arrived. She noted it, filed it for later, and continued watching the light move across the rooftops. This was already a change. In her first posting, she had read council transmissions within minutes of receipt. In her second, she had read them within the hour. Here, on this particular morning in her 14th month, she watched the light on the rooftops and left the transmission unread, and understood this as a piece of data about herself that the assessment framework also had no category for. She had met Piers Adlin in the third week. He taught urban ecology in the university's environmental sciences department, a field that examined the relationship between cities and the natural systems they had been built on top of, which was, she had found, a more philosophically rich subject than it initially appeared. He had noticed her in the seminar she had been auditing as part of her academic cover, and afterward, in the corridor, had asked her where she was from with the genuine, unhurried curiosity of someone who found people as interesting as ecosystems. She had given him the cover answer. He had received it, nodded, and then said, with the directness of someone who had not yet learned that directness made people uncomfortable, or had learned it and decided the alternative was worse, "That's where you're from. I was asking where you belong." She had been thinking about the distinction for 11 months. The transmission was still waiting when she put on her coat and went to meet him at the estuary. The Ithori assessment framework was, by any reasonable measure, an excellent instrument. It had been developed over 2 centuries of observational postings on 14 worlds, and refined with the care of people who believed that good data produced good decisions, and that good decisions produced good outcomes. Lyrian had used it on 2 prior postings, and found it adequate, and had never previously found adequate to be a criticism. The 47 categories covered everything that could be measured, and a significant portion of what could be estimated. They covered infrastructure and governance, and social cohesion and resource management, and the trajectory of a civilization's technological development. They covered conflict patterns, cooperative structures, and the relationship between a species' stated values and its demonstrated ones, which was a category she had always found the most honest. They did not cover the estuary at low tide on a cold morning, when the light came in flat across the water, and the mud revealed itself in specific, patient layers and piers crouched at the water's edge with a data recorder and the expression of a man who found this particular combination of light and mud and nitrogen cycle, genuinely wonderful. She had begun a supplementary document in month 9. It had no formal category. It was not part of her assessment submission. It was, if she was precise about what it was, a record of the things that were true about this place that the framework had no architecture for. The 6 o'clock light on the rooftops. The farmer's market on Tidal Street, where the vendor at the second stall knew her order and had it ready, which was a form of being known that was small and consistent and surprisingly structural. The seminars where peers talked about cities and the systems beneath them with the enthusiasm of someone who had not learned to moderate it and had no intention of learning. The supplementary document was, at last count, longer than the formal assessment. She had not submitted it. She was not sure what submitting it would mean, which was itself a piece of data she had been sitting with for some time. "You're thinking about the nitrogen cycle," Piers said, without looking up from his recorder. "I'm thinking about categories," she said. "Same thing from an ecological perspective," he said. "Categories are how systems decide what goes where. The problem is that the categories were designed for what was already there, and things keep arriving that weren't." He looked up at her then, with the direct, unpretentious attention that she had stopped being surprised by and had started being grateful for. "The estuary's doing it right now," he said. "The restoration is bringing back species that weren't in the original survey baseline. The framework keeps flagging them as anomalies. They're not anomalies, they're the point. She looked at the water. She thought about the supplementary document. I have a transmission I haven't read yet, she said. Anything important? Probably, she said. He nodded, in the way of someone who understood that probably was doing a great deal of work in that sentence and who had the generosity not to make her explain it further than she was ready to. They worked through the morning. The data collected itself. The estuary continued its restoration in the patient, systematic way of natural systems that have been given the conditions they need and are using them. She read the transmission that evening. The council's language was formal and precise and not unkind, which was always how they delivered things they expected to be difficult. They acknowledged her service. They noted the quality of her assessment data, which was, they said, the most comprehensive produced by an observer in the current generation. They outlined what was required: her return, her full report, her presence at the deliberations that her data would inform. 3 weeks. She read it twice, and then set it down and sat in her apartment with the 6 o'clock light going golden through the window, and thought about the deliberations her data would inform, and the decisions the deliberations would produce, and the outcomes the decisions would generate, and tried to locate, in the chain of it, the place where what she had found in 14 months of being here. The actual thing, the true thing, not the 47 categories of the accurate thing, would be present in the room. She could not locate it. She went to find Piers. He was at the Harbor Walk, which was where he went when he was working through something, and she had not told him to be there. But she was also not surprised to find him there, because 14 months of paying attention to a person produces a kind of knowledge that the assessment framework also had no category for. She told him what she could. Not everything, not yet, but enough. That she was from further away than she had said. That the work she was doing here was not what she had described. That she had 3 weeks, and that 3 weeks was the kind of timeline that required decisions she had not yet made. He was quiet for a long time. The harbor moved in its evening way, indifferent and reliable. What do you want? He said. She looked at him. She thought about how long it had been since anyone from her world had asked her that, not what was required, not what was expected, not what the framework indicated, but what she, specifically, wanted. I want to finish the estuary survey, she said. It was not the full answer. He knew it was not the full answer. He received it with the patience of someone willing to wait for the rest. Okay, he said. Then let's finish the estuary survey. She did not board the vessel. The formal declaration to the Ithori Council took her 4 days to write, which was longer than anything she had written in her professional life. Because she was writing it in the language the council respected, precise, evidenced, structured as an argument rather than a feeling. And the thing she was arguing for was, at its core, a feeling that she had spent 14 months accumulating evidence for without knowing that was what she was doing. She made the case for her choice the way she made all cases, completely, honestly, and without simplifying the parts that were complicated. She acknowledged what she was leaving. She was specific about what she was choosing instead and why the specificity mattered, not sentiment, but the argued position that belonging was a form of knowledge, and that knowledge accumulated in a place over sufficient time and depth became the kind of understanding that the council's deliberations needed and that the 47 categories could not produce. She submitted it and waited. The council's response arrived in stages: first formal acknowledgement, then a request for supplementary information, then a longer silence than she had expected, then a document that was neither approval nor refusal, but a conditional recognition that was, in the language of Ithori formal procedure, as close to unprecedented as she had encountered in the literature. She read it 3 times. Then she sent Piers a message that said, "It's complicated, but it's yes." His response came in under a minute: "Tell me over coffee. I'll get the bad kind as a celebration." She arrived at his office to find him already making it, with the expression of a man who has rearranged a significant number of things, and found that the new arrangement fits better than the old one, which was a process she recognized from the inside and found on him quietly wonderful. She told him everything: the Ithori, the posting, the assessment framework and its 47 categories, and the supplementary document that was longer than the official one. Her ears, which she had worn her hair over for 14 months, and which she allowed, in his office on that particular morning, to simply be what they were. He listened with the full, unhurried attention of a man who had spent his career studying what was actually present in a system rather than what the baseline survey had predicted. He asked 3 questions, all of them specific and good. She answered them completely. Then he said, "The supplementary document, the one you didn't submit." "Yes. Can I read it?" She looked at him. "It's not a scientific document," she said. "I know," he said. "That's why I want to read it." Several weeks later, she was at the estuary at low tide on a cold morning, the light coming in flat across the water. Holding a quality sensor in the specific way she had learned that produced the most accurate readings, while Piers crouched beside her and explained the nitrogen cycle with the focused pleasure of someone doing the thing they were built for. She knew the nitrogen cycle. He knew she knew. Neither of them was concerned about the redundancy, because the explanation was not about information transfer. It was about the particular, irreplaceable texture of being in a place with someone who found it wonderful, and having found it wonderful yourself, and knowing that knowing is not the same as finding. Her long ears caught the sound of the water before he did, which was simply how it was, and she had stopped wearing her hair over them 2 weeks after the conversation in his office, and he had stopped acting as though they required any particular acknowledgement 2 days after that, which was, she had concluded, the correct pace at which to absorb something true. "The framework is flagging the cordgrass density as an anomaly again," Piers said, looking at his recorder. "Because it's outside the baseline parameters," she said. "It's not an anomaly," he said. "It's the restoration working." "I know," she said. "The framework doesn't have a category for things arriving that weren't there before." He looked at her. "We should build one," he said. She looked at the estuary, the restored channels, the returning species, the patient accumulation of a system given the conditions it needed and using them. She thought about 47 categories and a supplementary document, and a formal declaration written in 4 days, and a council response that was as close to unprecedented as the literature contained. She thought about a question asked in a corridor 14 months ago, not where she was from, but where she belonged. "Yes," she said. "We should." The estuary continued its work around them, unhurried and specific, full of things that had arrived and taken root and were no longer anomalies, but simply, accurately, completely, the point. She was one of them. She had chosen to be. It fit.